lectures and talk about how social class affects our life chances. So, take-home message, just so you know what we're going to be talking about. Class inequality results in so many disadvantages and lacks of opportunities that we may not think about on a daily basis or may not even be aware of. So these disadvantages serve to reproduce a cycle of poverty in low SES families and impoverished segments of society. So if you don't get anything else from this lecture, I just hope that you get 1 point that maybe resonates with you or that you've never thought about before when it comes to class inequality, and I'll be good to go. So when we talk about these disadvantages, there are so many. And I mean, there are whole courses here at OU dedicated to a semester's worth of work on class inequality in itself. So I'm not going to attempt to cover every single thing because this is not possible in a 45-minute period. So for our purposes today, I just want you to focus on these 3 bullet points. So the lack of quality education that's associated with impoverished communities, limited access to stable jobs, which comes as a result of a lack of adequate education, and poorer health and shorter life expectancy as a result of maybe dangerous jobs or manual labor jobs that an inability to access higher education may force someone into almost. And a common theme that I want you to kind of pick up, each of these are interconnected, and you guys have been going over this throughout the whole semester, but sociology is all about interconnectivity. And so you can't have one of these in isolation. They almost always result in a domino effect. So just keep that in mind as we go through the slides. Okay, so I just want to start with a quick overview of who are the poor in the United States, who are impoverished segments of society. I know you guys went over the poverty line before, but just a quick kind of run through. The poverty threshold is determined by comparing pre-tax cash income against the threshold that is set at 3 times the cost of a minimum food diet in 1963. And this is used by the U.S. Census Bureau, and it's adjusted each year to account for inflation and the consumer price index. As of 2011, this threshold was $22,811 for a family of 4, which for a year really isn't a lot of money. So in 2011, 15% of the U.S. population fell below this threshold and thus were considered impoverished. And that translates to 46.2 million people. Okay, so here's just a quick graph of the general trends that we saw in here is 1968, 1990, and 2011. Overall, you see that the trend is going upward with the 15% in 2011. And then after that, we have them separated by age groups. So you have children, which sadly is going up in recent years, ages 18 to 64, elders, and then they're separated by non-elderly adults by race. So you see that Caucasian Americans make up a very, very low portion compared to other minorities, so like African Americans and Hispanic Americans. Unfortunately for Asian Americans, there's no data available before 2003, so they kind of so just kind of keep this in mind. These are the general trends. So some criticisms of the poverty threshold. It's based on a really old methodology, and you guys kind of went over this. Food costs are no longer the biggest expense for Americans. It's actually been replaced by housing, which isn't too surprising. The poverty threshold is also based on a national baseline, so it doesn't account for a family's geographic location. It's assumed that housing costs are the same in every community in the United States. And so considering that housing is factored into this poverty threshold, why would that be an issue to not account for where someone lives? Why would that be a bad thing? Exactly, right? So it's different by every location. I'm not going to, like if you live in like a really like rural community, would you expect that it might cost less than living, right? So, yeah, thank you. So yeah, the poverty struggling to keep the lights on, but as opposed to that, a very comfortable but modest lifestyle. And they call this the basic family budget. And one very important variable that they take into account when coming up with a basic family budget is the geographic location, where you live, how much housing costs in that area. What else? Let's see. Food in that area, the cost of childcare, transportation, healthcare, other necessities, and taxes are all taken into account when the basic family budget is calculated. Aside from housing, I mean, if you live in a rural community and, if there are jobs around, if you're trying to hold a job around, it's probably not going to be close to your home, right? Rural communities are more isolated than urban communities. There's less access to maybe public transit, so you need a car, so your transportation expense will probably be higher, right, if you live in a rural area. So just basic amenities like that we don't really keep in mind at all in the poverty threshold. These are included in this basic family budget. So these researchers found, here are two examples, for a two-parent, two-child family in rural Nebraska, the average, or the basic family budget for that year would be approximately $31,000. However, in Boston, Massachusetts, you see this huge difference with $65,000. So, I mean, it is huge. It's, what, 30? I don't know. I'm not but it's a big deal. So, if you, let's say you're using this poverty threshold, right? And like every other policymaker, they look to the poverty threshold to determine things like welfare programs, who gets public assistance. Everybody looks to this number. So if you're a policymaker looking at how to institute policy to help people of lower SES in Boston, Massachusetts, and you're looking at this number, $19,000, when they need approximately $65,000 to live comfortably, see how that could be an issue. This is 1/3, I do know that much math, of the approximately 1/3 of what they would need to live, what they would need to get by. So that's obviously a big problem when considering policy implications using the poverty threshold measurement. So when we're talking about the United States, regionally the South has the highest poverty rate in the U.S. with 13.8% and followed very closely by the West. And this can be due to large minority populations that live in these areas and relatively high concentrations of recent immigrants, both of which are historically disadvantaged segments of the population and are more likely to hold a good amount of poverty in the United States, as we saw in the previous graph. Right? At least it surprised me. I don't know, is anybody else surprised that the Midwest had the lowest poverty rate in the U.S.? Is anybody surprised by that? I was. I don't know how you guys feel about it. Regardless of this, this low amount of regional poverty being concentrated in the Midwest, I decided to kind of narrow our lecture from here on out to an area that kind of encompasses the Midwest, but is one of the 4 most impoverished regions in the United States, and that is Appalachia. So as you can see, Appalachia goes all the way from some southern parts of New York through Pennsylvania, West Virginia, parts of Maryland, eastern Ohio, which is where we are, eastern Kentucky, Tennessee, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, and Virginia, West Virginia. I didn't say this. So in the heart of this area is central Appalachia. It's kind of like step down in the middle. Also located in Appalachia is us, right? Ohio University, located in Athens, Ohio, in Athens County, which is one of the poorest counties in Ohio. So, considering that Ohio University is kind of like its own little mecca in the middle of Appalachia, our experiences of Appalachia are going to be drastically different than, say, if you drive 10 minutes either way outside of Athens and see something like the one towns and rundown housing. I don't know if anybody has like taken a road trip just for fun around Athens, but it becomes pretty clear when you get to the outskirts where our community of Ohio University stops and where everybody else starts. There's a clear distinction between our vast and expansive brick buildings and all this, fancy technology stuff, and satellites. And so there's a big difference between seeing this and, say, some of the other communities that are located outside of Athens. So yeah, we're going to focus on Central Appalachia, which is concentrated in Eastern Kentucky, West Virginia, and parts of Eastern Ohio. And these are some of the poorest and most isolated parts of Appalachia, which is why I'm deciding to focus here when we're talking about poverty and low SES. Can I have a clip? There's Diane Sawyer did a documentary called Children of the Mountains, and it's part of the Hidden America series. I don't know if anybody's seen it. It might be familiar when I start playing it. Basically, she follows 3 young people and their families, and they kind of document their day-to-day life and the struggles they face with rural poverty. So in this clip, Courtney, a 12-year-old girl, and her sister Mary are kind of telling Diane Sawyer about their mother and some of the things that have happened recently in their lives.
Our mommy used to be hooked on drugs. And we did not like it one bit.
Courtney says she used to lock herself in the bathroom and cry when her mom got high. They bounced from place to place and are grateful they now have a place to sleep, her grandparents, where her 2 uncles, 1 aunt, 3 sisters, and her mom's boyfriend Bill also live.
There's 12 people living in this house altogether. Honestly, I would love for me, my mom, Bill, and us girls to have our own home, but we do not have the money to do that. Bill is wanting to get a job, but we can't because we ain't got a car and getting back and forth.
Courtney shows us an A on her report card and tells us about her 2 simple wishes. That home, and she says someday she'd like to have boots with little fake fur on the top, like the ones Hannah Montana wears on TV. Courtney's clothes are stuffed in a suitcase under the bed.
Honestly, we can barely afford food. Whenever her food stamps are all gone, we run out of food. We don't have bread, we don't have meat. Last time we was out of food, the only thing we had in our fridge was butter and ranch. We're not like other people. We can't afford food after food after food.
Fruits and vegetables, a rare luxury because of the expense. Their mother's food stamps are $523 a month. Milk runs out fast. Courtney's uncle, called Uncle Doug, puts Pepsi in 2-year-old Sable's sippy cup. Courtney is one of those children whose face seems to reach right back across the centuries to the famous portraits by Walker Evans, Doris Ullman, Earl Palmer, where worry and wariness are in the faces of the children. The adults are ravaged by exhaustion, defeat. Angel is ravaged by something modern. She is Courtney's mother. She lost her teeth years ago. She's 30 years old.
I would have to have 10 pain pills just to get started, to not be sick, and I would take it to 30 to 40 a day. Easy. There were days I'd go to drug counseling, but as soon as I left, I would sit in the parking lot and store a pill.
She's part of an epidemic in these mountains. Eastern Kentucky has a prescription drug abuse rate twice that of major cities like New York or Miami. Courtney and her sisters remember when their mother would disappear for days on end.
Mary does not want me to go anywhere. Mary will make me pinky promise that I will not leave.
Angel says she's now trying to give her children the future they deserve, and before dawn gets them on the 6:15 school bus.
Come on, you got 4 minutes.
Then she and her boyfriend Bill start the trek to the welfare-mandated GED class in the center of town. A walk, 8 miles, one way. It takes nearly 2 hours.
All I can really do is try to salvage what little bit I can.
After the class, another 2 hours and 8 miles in the freezing cold to go home. It starts to rain.
The That just weighs you down.
Angel says if she can get that GED in 2 months, she has a chance of a job, getting off welfare.
Are you ready for it?
I believe so. I believe I am.
It's a very good documentary if anybody would like to link. So in there you kind of see a lot of themes that we associate with kind of like living in poverty and having a low SES family. They walk 2 hours one way to GED classes in the pouring, freezing rain. So again, not having something that we may take for granted every day, a car to drive around to get to a GED class, is something that they simply don't have in impoverished families. And also, I don't know what was on that girl's plate with all the ketchup and stuff, but I mean, you know, the food stamps run out and they don't really have any other options. They just kind of eat what they have. They had butter and ranch in their fridge once and that was it. So, just some things to keep in mind when we consider people of low SES, especially in rural populations. There may be more to it than you can see. Just keep that in mind. Good segue into our talk about education, which is one of the first bullets that I want to talk about with you today. Education is a crucial determinant of one's chance of income, right? I mean, I could go around the room and ask all of you why you're sitting in class right now, why you want to get a degree, and what's one answer I could probably pretty much count on? Money? Right, you want a job, right? You want to get your credential, get out of here, get a job, and get paid. I mean, it sounds good to me. So, you know, something that we consider, we may take for granted in getting a job is education and our ability to get a higher education here at OU. So, even before we consider university or anything like that, we go through this system, high school, junior high, middle school, elementary school, and many of us go to public schools. I went to public school. So when you consider public schools in rural versus urban areas or wealthy versus impoverished areas, you have to consider their funding and what resources they have available. One of the big determinants of a school's resources and facilities is their tax base. So if you live in, rural Appalachia and you have to go to school, you're probably not going to see brand new computers and brand new textbooks and things like that maybe wealthier school districts can't afford because their tax base is pretty high. If you live in a wealthy community, your tax base is probably relatively high. So even just as far back as high school and junior high, you're being tracked by basically where you live, which is a harsh reality, but it's true. In addition to funding by a district's tax base, we have things like No Child Left Behind, the notorious No Child Left Behind Act, which a part of this mandate, it bases the amount of money that the federal government will give to a school district based on their performances on standardized tests, the students' performances on standardized tests. So what's the problem with that then? If you go to a school that doesn't have very good resources or facilities, maybe not the best teachers because they're underpaid, right? What are the implications of No Child Left Behind?
Just focusing on those tests like to be autonomous and not getting a welfare with education, right? Just
Right.
math, science.
Exactly. It's a very good point. Would you all agree? Yeah.
I was going to also, if they are already have the funding, their textbooks might not be up to date, so they might be learning completely old material that when you get standardized tests, it's something wrong that they were taught.
Right.
An old thing they were taught, so they're going to end up messing with the test and still not getting it.
It's an excellent point. If you have the wrong textbook and you're studying the wrong material, how do you think you're going to do on a standardized test? Probably not very good, right? So, yeah.
Mom teaches second grade in High County, and she said that, during standardized tests and whatnot, the kids don't care what before they'll get, because they're more worried about like what the next meal will be, or like if it'll be warm when they go home, or like if their parents would even be there. So it's like, it's hard to like teach children to have like bigger things to worry about.
Right. That's a very good point. That's something I had not thought of. So yeah, if you're worried about where your next meal is coming from, do you care what number you get on the standardized test? No, probably not. So, thank you guys. Appreciate it. In addition to this, beyond a high school education, beyond standardized tests, we have rising college tuitions and decreases in federal funding to go to college, which in itself, like, face palm, right? Like, how can people below SES afford to go to college if they're not getting funding, but the price is also going up? So you see how we get stuck in this really awful situation for people who live in poverty. So some statistics, I mean, you guys pretty much know what's going on, but 35% of students with families of incomes less than $25,000 enroll in college, compared to 80% of those with families of incomes higher than $75,000. So 35 compared to 80, pretty big difference. 55% of students of low-income families graduate, compared to 73% of students of families with higher incomes. So that's not very surprising, right? Like, if you're worried about your family back home in Pike County, you said? If you're worried about your family back home in Pike County and how they're going to be eating, and you know what the temperature in the house is like, or if they need you to maybe come home and pay bills to heat that house, you're probably not going to finish college, because your family will probably be more important to you, right? So you may drop out of college to go back home. This last one really just is troublesome. 78% of students from low-income families who rank as the top achievers attend college. 77% of affluent students who rank at the bottom academically attend college. So clearly there's something there that's beyond academic capabilities, right? There's going to be some other factors affecting whether you go to college. And so in the domino effect, in the interconnectivity of sociology, your lack of education results in very limited options when it comes to employment. You know, if you don't have your GED, or if you, I mean, yeah, not even having a high school diploma, much less a college diploma, you know, how far is that going to get you? But maybe some low-wage work in the service sector and, you know, food industry, which I've worked in, maybe some of you in here have too, and it's just awful. And considering the upward mobility of children such as Courtney, her chances of upward mobility are they're small. She doesn't have very many resources to go on, probably no one to educate her about college unless there's a counselor at school. So just some things to keep in mind when you consider the effects of low SES on children and their abilities to kind of like get out, pull themselves up by their bootstraps and make it. Because if you don't have resources to do it, you can't just snap your fingers and make it happen. If you don't have a job, you could get a dangerous job, at least in Appalachia. Higher education reduces the likelihood that men will enter manual labor jobs, which may be dangerous, such as mining. And this results in a lower life expectancy, and a higher risk of injury. I kind of know this one. So I don't know if anybody's heard of the Upper Big Bridge mine disaster. It happened in West Virginia. The top of the mine collapsed and killed 29 men who were trapped inside. So, and this is just one of many, many examples. You can go on YouTube or Google and just find tons of examples of mine disasters. It's a very dangerous job. When you're not worried about it falling in on you, you can worry about the coal dust and the toxic chemicals that you have to breathe in while you're underground for days. You know, working very long hours, very long back-breaking hours. And breathing in all this icky junk that gets in your lungs and can lead to chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, or COPD, lung cancer, esophageal cancer, all that stuff. So I have a 60 Minutes clip, which I thought was really interesting. I believe they're in Virginia, but it doesn't really specify. And they take you inside a mine. So just kind of to get an idea of some of the dangerous jobs that you may be forced to go into if you don't have proper education.
obesity.
There's no obesity, not at all. Everybody all right? Okay.
It's amazing to think that this is entirely man-made, and there wasn't any cavity here at all.
Just a year ago, the tunnel we walked through was solid coal. The tunnel is 5 to 7 feet high and 20 feet across.
Are you hearing that?
You can hear the coal's ominous snap, crackle, and pop caused by the enormous weight of the mountain above us pressing down on the coal seam.
Nice piece of coal.
That's it.
The tunnel is so long that miners don't walk to work. They squeeze into squat little rail cars called man trips for a 20-minute commute that feels less like Disneyland and more like a ride into hell. The miners we met seem proud of the fact that coal generates half the country's electricity.
When I'm in Disney World, I tell my kids, James River Coal is supplying all these rides.
On both sides of the tracks, we saw rocks that had fallen from the ceiling. The black coal walls of the tunnel had been sprayed with crushed limestone to control the amount of coal dust in the air.
I don't think people have the slightest idea what goes into building a mine. I also find it amazing that you did all this in a year and a half. It's incredible.
There's enough coal in this mine to keep digging for another 15 years. After a 20-minute ride on the man trip, we arrived at the end of the line.
This is the face of the mine, 2 miles from the shaft and 1,400 feet underground. And this machine is called a continuous miner. It claws its way through the mountain, mining coal and digging the tunnel at the same time.
The continuous miner digs and dumps 8 tons of coal and rock every minute into shuttle cars. After the coal is removed, miners drill and bolt metal rods into the ceiling. And it's the most dangerous work in the mine.
They'll put the glue in the hole, put this bolt in, and spin that bolt, and that will mix this glue, and it'll set up the rock.
And the purpose of that is?
It builds the beams that supports the rock layers between the 2 pillars that are left.
In other words, you're putting these up so the roof doesn't fall in there.
That's correct. That's it. That's what mining is right there.
Anybody else think that's freaking terrifying? Right? Like, I mean, maybe it's because I'm afraid of the dark and kind of claustrophobic, but that looks absolutely terrifying. So yeah, clearly a dangerous job. They're standing there as they're digging, holes in this wall of coal above them so it doesn't fall on them. So I mean, clearly a really risky and dangerous job. So going off of that, like I said earlier, people in poverty are more likely to suffer from certain kinds of cancers, like lung, cervix, esophageal, hypertension, infant mortality, disability, and infectious diseases. Why might some of these reasons be, aside from the obvious, like the job as a coal miner and black lung disease, which we talked about? Why might some of these other things, like cervix cancer, hypertension, infant mortality, disability, why might these be issues for people in poverty? Yeah.
So we can't afford medical care.
True, yeah, exactly. or if, I mean, if it's even around, right? If they even have facilities that can provide care. Exactly. If you're working a low-wage job, odds are you probably don't have the best insurance package, right? If any at all. So, yeah. So some policy implications. In sociology, it's like common for you to just, you know, delve into this really almost depressing kind of topic or something that's very hard-hitting. But we always try to come back with a way to kind of help it or like decrease it. At least we hope. So the poverty rate is often cited by policymakers, researchers, and advocates who evaluate social programs that account for more than $500 billion in government spending. $500 billion. Like, it's an insane amount of money. So when we look at things like the poverty threshold, it's really important that we have accurate measurements, right? So something that researchers have been promoting is to replace this poverty threshold with the family budgets that we talked about earlier, accounting for geographic location, transportation, child care, medical facilities.